I had been listening to the planet for 11 days before it said anything worth writing down. My name is Cale Voss, and my job aboard the Halcyon Vow was not glamorous. I kept the reactor sweet, kept the stealth coil fed, kept the air recyclers from coughing in the small hours when the whole boat was running on a whisper of power and nobody wanted to hear a single fan-bearing complain. We called the world below us the dead hour, because its night side never turned toward any sun. The locals called it something older, something that didn't translate clean, but the closest the linguists could get was last night. Like the night itself was a person who had died and stayed. We were there because of a transmission. 3 weeks before, a signal had reached the edge of the system, untranslated, repeated 11 times, and on the 12th, the computers finally cracked it. It was not a greeting, it was an inventory. Population figures for Earth, broken down by hemisphere, followed by a single phrase that the linguists rendered, after a great deal of argument, as the light will end where the light has been too proud. Whoever had sent it knew exactly how many of us there were to put out. Command's answer was not a fleet, it was the Vow, alone, running black, sent to confirm one fact, before anyone above my pay grade decided what came next. Was the threat real, and could it reach us? I worked the engineering console in the aft pit, 3 decks below the bridge, where the only window I had was a bank of feeds, hull stress, coil temperature, and a tactical plot that updated whenever the sensor crew bled me data to keep the heat sink steady. That's how I saw it first, before the bridge crew said a word over the comm. A formation. 41 hulls, low orbit, holding a pattern too disciplined to be anything but ceremonial, and beneath them, a structure on the surface that the survey drones had mapped as a temple before anyone admitted what it was actually for. A weapon housing, built to look like worship. The locals called themselves the choir, and what they sang to wasn't a god in any shape we'd recognize. It was the dark itself. Their whole civilization ran on a doctrine so old it had outlived every challenge to it, that nothing comes from the black uninvited, that the void announces its masters, and obeys none who arrive without warning. A power that simply appeared, with no herald, no fleet seen crossing the dark to get there, was by their own law no power at all. It was noise, and noise could be silenced. That doctrine was why they thought the inventory transmission was safe to send. They had not seen us cross to get there, and by their reckoning, nothing had. The high speaker who ruled them was a man, close enough to a man, named Mordeth Yule, and the weapon under his temple had a name too, the Umbral Lance, built to do exactly what its name promised. Strip a world of every photon it had left, and leave the people on it to die by the only light remaining, which would be none. He had not built it to defend his world. He had built it to end ours, because his scripture told him that anything which approached without ceremony wasn't a threat worth fearing, and Earth, to his instruments, had approached with nothing. We sat under his fleet for 4 more days, gathering targeting data, mapping the temple's power bus, listening to his priests broadcast their certainty to the lower orders in long, looping hymns about a silence no one could break. I won't pretend I didn't feel the size of it pressing on the hull. 41 warships and a god weapon, and us, alone, holding our breath in a coil of bent light. Lieutenant Okonkwo Reyes, our captain, never raised his voice once in those 4 days. He gave his orders the way a man checks a level on a shelf. Quiet, exact, no patience for drama. That tone went through the boat like ballast. By the 3rd day, even the youngest deckhand had stopped flinching at every new contact on the plot. There's a particular fatigue that comes from running silent that long. The boat doesn't sleep, and neither do you. You learn the sound of every system at idle until any change in pitch reads as a threat before your conscious mind catches up. I spent those 4 days cataloging a doctrine I'd never have believed if I hadn't watched it broadcast itself, hour after hour, to an audience that believed every word of it. It is a strange thing to listen to a civilization's entire theology and realize the only thing standing between that theology and our deaths was whether we let ourselves be seen on our own terms or theirs. On the 5th day, Command's answer came through the deep space relay, 3 words long: confirm and announce. Announce was the part nobody aboard had trained for. We hadn't come to fight. We'd come to be seen, deliberately, On our own terms, in a way their doctrine said was impossible. Reyes called it correctly in the briefing. If their whole faith rested on the idea that nothing real arrives without warning from the void, then the truest weapon we owned wasn't the rail batteries in the forward bay. It was simply standing there. I was at my console when he gave the order to drop the coil. There's a sound a stealth field makes when it lets go. Not a noise exactly, more a pressure easing out of your inner ear, like a depth you didn't know you were under. Then the hull cameras lit, and for 1/2 second every screen in the aft pit was full of stars that had, until that moment, been bending politely around us. The Halcyon Vow did not fire. We did not even charge the batteries. We simply appeared, mid-formation, lit by the temple's own floodlights, close enough that their lead cruiser had to correct course to avoid a collision with a ship its sensors had insisted, 2 seconds earlier, did not exist. I watched it happen across 41 separate sensor returns, each one a small flare of confusion, as targeting systems that had spent 4 days seeing nothing tried to reconcile a hull that had simply always been there. On the surface, the temple's broadcast, the long looping hymn about a silence no one could break, stopped mid-phrase. It did not resume. What followed wasn't a battle. It was slower than that, and stranger to watch from a console 3 decks down. Their lesser orders, the priest captains who answered to Yule but prayed the same liturgy as everyone below them, began breaking formation, not toward us, not in panic, but away from the temple, in small, deliberate groups, as though each ship were quietly excusing itself from a sermon it no longer believed. Their own doctrine had just failed them in front of their own eyes. A power had come from the dark, uninvited, unannounced, unseen, until it chose to be seen, and by their own law, that made it the only true power any of them had ever witnessed. Mordeth Yule's scripture had armed his enemy's fear, and disarmed his own followers' faith in the same instant. I heard the surface channel patch through to the bridge near the end. Yule, alone now, his fleet thinned to a handful of loyalists, demanding his lance be charged anyway. That doctrine or no doctrine, the weapon didn't care what anyone believed. Reyes let the channel run a long moment before he answered, and when he did, his voice was as level as it had been on the first day. "We didn't come to take anything from you," he said. "We came so you'd know we could have, and didn't." There was no answer to that worth recording, and none came. The lance never charged. By the time our own relay confirmed the surface power signature dropping to standby, the priest captains who'd broken away had formed a loose perimeter of their own, not against us, but around the temple, the way you'd stand around something you no longer trusted to be left unwatched. We held position 11 more hours, long enough for command to confirm there'd be no second transmission, no second inventory of how many of us there were left to count. Then we went dark again, coil humming back up under my hands, the stars bending closed around us the way they had before, and the dead hour fell away behind the hull like something that had finally, after all that ceremony, gone quiet on its own. Word of it didn't reach the rest of the crew the way I expected. There was no celebration, no toast in the mess, no one slapping backs over what we'd pulled off without firing a single round. Reyes held the same level voice in the debrief he'd held the whole transit out, reminding everyone that the mission had been confirmation and presence, nothing more, and that anyone treating a stand-down as a victory hadn't understood what we'd actually risked to get it. I think he was right to say it. We hadn't won anything from the choir, we'd only refused to let their doctrine decide, on their terms, what we were. I've thought about that hour more than almost anything else in my service record. Not the 41 ships, not the weapon, not even the man who built it. What I remember is the half-second before we appeared, when nothing in the universe had changed yet, except one switch in my hands, and an entire civilization's certainty about what could and couldn't come for them in the dark was still, for one more breath, intact. We didn't break that certainty with fire, we broke it just by arriving, and let them watch it fall apart in their own light.